No one who entered the Grand Continental Hotel that evening could have imagined that the future of three global criminal empires would soon depend on a woman delivering sandwiches. High above Manhattan, hidden behind bulletproof glass and guarded by dozens of heavily armed soldiers, Lorenzo Moretti prepared for the most critical negotiation of his life. To the public, he was little more than an elusive billionaire whose business empire stretched across continents. Behind closed doors, however, Lorenzo was something far more formidable. He was the undisputed leader of the Moretti family, the most influential crime syndicate in New York, a man whose decisions controlled international shipping routes, underground financial networks, and alliances that reached from Europe to Asia. His reputation had been built through discipline rather than recklessness. He rarely raised his voice, never revealed his emotions, and understood that in his world, one careless mistake could destroy decades of carefully constructed power. Tonight's meeting was supposed to guarantee his organization's dominance for generations. Representatives from three of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations had accepted his invitation, each bringing enormous influence and equally enormous suspicion. Grigory Udin, the ruthless Russian oligarch who controlled vital Baltic shipping corridors, had arrived with a convoy of heavily armed bodyguards. Wei Chen, a senior leader of the Macau Triad, whose network dominated the West Coast ports, occupied the opposite side of the table with quiet confidence. Across from Lorenzo sat Hector Salazar, the feared Sinaloa cartel boss whose reputation for unpredictable violence made even experienced criminals uneasy. None of these men truly trusted one another. The proposed agreement promised unimaginable profits, but every participant knew that a single betrayal could trigger a war, extending across several continents. Every sentence spoken inside the penthouse carried the weight of thousands of lives, while every pause concealed calculations that reached far beyond money alone. At Lorenzo's side stood Sergio, the trusted interpreter who had served him faithfully for years. His responsibility extended far beyond translating conversations. He ensured that every cultural nuance, every carefully chosen expression, and every diplomatic courtesy reached the other side exactly as intended. In negotiations where misunderstandings could start wars, an exceptional interpreter was almost as valuable as an army. The meeting had barely begun when tragedy struck without warning. Sergio lifted his espresso, took a single sip, and froze. His expression twisted in confusion before unbearable pain spread across his face. The porcelain cup slipped from his fingers and shattered against the polished marble floor as he collapsed beside the massive mahogany table. Foam gathered around his mouth while his body convulsed violently. Within seconds, the room descended into absolute chaos. Lorenzo immediately recognized the unmistakable signs of a fast-acting neurotoxin, but there was nothing anyone could do. The poison had already done its work. Sergio gasped desperately for air before falling completely still, his lifeless eyes staring blankly toward the ceiling. For the first time in many years, Lorenzo felt genuine uncertainty. He had not only lost one of his closest confidants, but also the only person capable of keeping the fragile negotiation alive. Silence lingered for only a heartbeat before suspicion consumed the room. Grigory slammed both hands onto the table, shouting furious accusations in rapid Russian while his guards instinctively raised their weapons. Wei Chen responded just as aggressively in Mandarin, convinced that someone had attempted to eliminate every foreign delegation inside the penthouse. Hector Salazar laughed coldly before drawing his pistol, convinced the assassination had merely been the opening move of a larger conspiracy. Within moments, more than a dozen firearms were aimed across the room. Fingers tightened around triggers while heavily armed bodyguards positioned themselves behind their respective leaders. No one trusted anyone. Every glance became a threat. Every movement looked like preparation for murder, and Lorenzo realized that unless communication was restored immediately, the alliance would dissolve into a massacre that would ignite a global underworld conflict. He attempted to calm the gathering, speaking in English, but only fragments of his words were understood. Without Sergio, the invisible bridge connecting four vastly different cultures had disappeared. The empire Lorenzo had spent decades building seemed ready to collapse in less than a minute. Then at the exact moment violence appeared inevitable, the massive oak doors suddenly opened. Every weapon in the penthouse turned toward the unexpected interruption. Standing motionless in the doorway was Beatrice Gallagher, a 32-year-old catering employee carrying two oversized insulated delivery bags filled with hot pastrami sandwiches. Sweat covered her forehead after climbing dozens of flights of stairs because the service elevator had malfunctioned. Her inexpensive uniform clung uncomfortably to her body, and exhaustion was written across her face. She had expected nothing more dramatic than collecting a signature for an expensive lunch order. Instead, she found herself staring at a dead man lying on the floor, while four of the world's most feared criminals aimed their guns directly at her chest. Fear rooted her feet to the entrance, yet instinct told her that any sudden movement could cost her life. The atmosphere was so suffocating that even breathing felt dangerous. Rather than viewing her as an innocent civilian, the assembled crime bosses saw only a witness who knew too much. Grigori angrily ordered his men to eliminate the intruder before she could speak to anyone outside the room. Wei Chen mocked America's security while ridiculing the frightened delivery woman's appearance in fluent Mandarin. Hector Salazar added his own crude remarks in rapid regional Spanish, laughing as though her death were nothing more than entertainment. Their insults focused almost entirely on her weight, her cheap uniform, and the absurd image of an ordinary catering worker wandering into one of the most secretive meetings in organized crime. Lorenzo closed his eyes, briefly convinced gunfire would erupt at any second. Instead, he heard something entirely unexpected. Beatrice let out a long, exhausted sigh, carefully lowered the heavy catering bags onto the floor, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and looked directly at the furious Russian oligarch. When she finally spoke, the entire room froze. Her voice emerged in flawless native Russian, every syllable carrying the unmistakable accent of someone raised in Moscow rather than New York. She calmly informed Grigori that if he intended to kill her, he should at least settle the catering bill first instead of behaving like a rude customer. The Russian leader's expression changed instantly from fury to complete disbelief. Before anyone could recover, Beatrice turned toward Wei Chen and replied in perfect Mandarin, correcting his insult while demonstrating an understanding of Chinese etiquette that few foreigners ever mastered. Shock spread across the triad leader's face as he realized she had understood every word he had spoken. Then she shifted her attention to Hector Salazar, answering his vulgar joke in authentic, colloquial Mexican Spanish with such natural rhythm that even the cartel boss struggled to believe what he was hearing. In less than a minute, the terrified delivery worker had effortlessly spoken 3 completely different languages, matching regional accents, cultural expressions, and social nuances with astonishing precision. The room that moments earlier had stood on the edge of a bloodbath fell into absolute silence. Lorenzo stared at Beatrice as though fate itself had placed her in front of him. While everyone else remained paralyzed by disbelief, his mind immediately grasped the extraordinary significance of what had just happened. This woman possessed far more than remarkable linguistic talent. She instinctively understood cultural context, emotional subtext, and the hidden meaning buried beneath carefully chosen words. In a world where a single mistranslated phrase could start a war, such an ability was beyond priceless. Looking into her frightened but determined eyes, Lorenzo realized that the ordinary catering employee standing before him was the only person capable of saving the negotiation, preserving the alliance, and perhaps rescuing his empire from complete destruction. In that unforgettable moment, Beatrice Gallagher unknowingly stepped across an invisible line that would separate her ordinary past from a future she could never have imagined. The silence inside the penthouse lingered for several long seconds after Beatrice finished speaking. None of the men around the table could believe that an exhausted catering worker had effortlessly accomplished what even the world's best interpreters would have struggled to do under such impossible pressure. Lorenzo Moretti never took his eyes off her. While everyone else remained stunned by her remarkable command of multiple languages, he noticed something far more extraordinary. She had not merely translated words, she had instinctively understood emotion, intention, and cultural meaning. That difference was everything. In the criminal underworld, wars were rarely started by bullets alone. More often, they began because someone misunderstood an insult, misread a negotiation tactic, or failed to recognize a hidden threat concealed beneath polite conversation. Lorenzo had spent years building alliances that depended entirely on trust, precision, and mutual respect. Standing before him was a woman whose talent could protect everything he had spent his life creating. Without hesitation, Lorenzo calmly stepped toward Beatrice and gently took the clipboard from her trembling hands. Reading the name stitched onto her inexpensive uniform, he looked directly into her frightened eyes before making an offer that left the entire room speechless. He promised to transfer $2 million into any bank account she chose if she agreed to remain for the rest of the meeting and serve as his interpreter. Beatrice stared at him in complete disbelief. Only minutes earlier, her greatest concern had been finishing her delivery route before the next order arrived. Now the most feared mafia boss in New York was offering her a fortune simply to sit beside him. Every instinct urged her to refuse and run as far away from the building as possible. Yet escape was no longer an option. Armed guards surrounded every exit. 4 international crime bosses waited impatiently for negotiations to continue, and the dead body of Lorenzo's former interpreter had only recently been removed from the room. Realizing she had little choice, Beatrice slowly took the empty seat beside Lorenzo, her heart pounding so violently she feared everyone could hear it. The meeting resumed almost immediately, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Every participant now watched Beatrice instead of Lorenzo. She inhaled deeply, steadied her shaking hands beneath the polished mahogany table, and allowed years of academic training to overcome the panic threatening to cloud her thoughts. Lorenzo quietly delivered his opening proposal regarding shipping routes through the port of Newark and future distribution agreements across Europe. Beatrice translated every sentence into flawless Russian, carefully choosing expressions commonly used within organized crime, rather than relying on textbook vocabulary. Grigory listened carefully before responding with what appeared to be a reasonable counteroffer. However, as she interpreted his reply, Beatrice recognized a familiar idiom deeply rooted in Russian criminal culture. To anyone unfamiliar with its history, the phrase simply suggested patience during negotiations. Within the Moscow underworld, however, it carried an entirely different meaning. It implied temporary cooperation before inevitable betrayal. Without interrupting the discussion, she calmly translated Grigory's official response before quietly leaning toward Lorenzo and explaining the hidden implication. She believed the Russian oligarch had already decided to seize the shipment instead of honoring the agreement once it reached St. Petersburg. Lorenzo remained outwardly expressionless, yet inwardly he was astonished. Sergio had always translated conversations accurately, but he had never interpreted invisible layers of cultural intention hidden beneath ordinary speech. Beatrice was doing something entirely different. She understood how language reflected history, hierarchy, pride, and deception. As negotiations continued, her extraordinary abilities became increasingly obvious. She softened potentially offensive wording before it reached the triad leader without changing its meaning, preventing an unnecessary confrontation. She adjusted Lorenzo's statements when speaking to Hector Salazar, replacing formal diplomatic language with expressions more familiar to cartel culture, ensuring respect was communicated naturally rather than mechanically. Several times she subtly rephrased responses to preserve each leader's dignity while quietly steering the conversation away from conflict. Rather than acting as a translator, she became an invisible architect guiding the entire negotiation toward success. Hour after hour, Beatrice balanced 4 radically different cultures with astonishing composure despite her growing exhaustion. She recognized when silence carried greater meaning than spoken words. She understood when an apparent concession was actually a challenge to authority. She identified coded expressions that hinted at future obligations long before anyone else noticed them. Gradually, suspicion inside the room began to dissolve. The hostile atmosphere that had threatened to erupt into violence transformed into cautious cooperation as each crime boss realized his words were finally being understood exactly as intended. By the end of the meeting, the historic alliance had been completed. Contracts were accepted, and billions of dollars in future operations had been secured without another weapon leaving its holster. Lorenzo understood with complete certainty that none of it would have been possible without the quiet woman sitting beside him. The successful negotiation, however, created an entirely new problem. As the delegates prepared to leave, each of them recognized Beatrice's extraordinary value. Grigory openly praised her remarkable intelligence before suggesting she should abandon Lorenzo and work for the Russian syndicate, instead promising limitless wealth and influence. Wei Chen silently studied her with calculating eyes, already considering how valuable someone with her linguistic abilities would be within the Triad's international operations. Even Hector Salazar laughed and remarked that a woman capable of reading people as easily as languages deserved far greater opportunities than delivering sandwiches. Their admiration sounded polite, but Lorenzo immediately recognized the dangerous reality hidden beneath their compliments. In his world, exceptionally talented people were never left alone. They were recruited, purchased, manipulated, kidnapped, or eliminated. Allowing Beatrice to walk back to her ordinary apartment would almost certainly place a target on her back before sunrise. Once the guests finally departed, Beatrice let out a long breath she had unknowingly been holding for hours. She stood from the oversized leather chair, thanked Lorenzo for the promised payment, and nervously explained that she simply wanted to return home. Lorenzo's expression softened, yet his answer immediately shattered that hope. He quietly explained that going home was no longer possible. By participating in the negotiation, she had unintentionally become one of the most valuable civilians in the international criminal underworld. Every organization that had witnessed her abilities now understood exactly what she could do. If she disappeared from Lorenzo's protection, rival syndicates would inevitably attempt to recruit her by force or silence her forever to prevent anyone else from using her talents. Beatrice's face turned pale as the horrifying reality settled over her. She had not chosen this life, yet it had already chosen her. That very evening, Lorenzo personally escorted her to one of his private penthouses overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Everything about the residence contrasted sharply with the modest apartment where she had spent years worrying about rent, overdue bills, and unpredictable work schedules. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city below. Custom-designed furniture filled every room, and a private chef quietly prepared dinner while professional security personnel monitored every entrance around the clock. Lorenzo instructed his financial advisors to establish new bank accounts in her name before transferring the promised $2 million exactly as agreed. He arranged for renowned designers to create an entirely new wardrobe tailored specifically for her instead of forcing her to conform to unrealistic standards. Experienced bodyguards were assigned to protect her at all times, and every detail of her new environment was carefully designed to keep her safe from anyone who might seek to exploit her extraordinary abilities. Despite the overwhelming luxury surrounding her, Beatrice found little comfort during those first days. She felt trapped between two completely different worlds. The financial struggles that had once dominated her life disappeared almost overnight, yet the freedom she had always taken for granted seemed to vanish just as quickly. Lorenzo noticed her discomfort immediately. Rather than treating her like a possession or an employee, he gradually began spending time with her outside formal meetings. Their first conversations had nothing to do with organized crime. He asked about her years studying linguistics at Georgetown University, listened as she explained why anxiety had prevented her from pursuing a traditional academic career, and admitted that he admired the determination it had taken for her to continue moving forward despite constant setbacks. In return, Beatrice slowly discovered that behind Lorenzo's calm authority and intimidating reputation stood a man burdened by impossible responsibilities, forced to make life-or-death decisions every single day while carrying the force, weight of an entire criminal empire on his shoulders. Little by little, trust began replacing fear. Lorenzo no longer saw Beatrice merely as the woman who had rescued an important negotiation. He began relying on her judgment, seeking her opinion before making significant decisions, and respecting her honesty, even when her conclusions challenged his own instincts. Likewise, Beatrice gradually realized that beneath Lorenzo's ruthless reputation was someone who valued intelligence above appearances and loyalty above blind obedience. Their partnership evolved naturally through countless conversations, shared victories, and quiet moments of mutual understanding, creating a bond neither of them had expected when fate first brought a frightened catering worker into the middle of a billion-dollar mafia negotiation. Life inside the Moretti organization quickly settled into a new rhythm, yet no one underestimated how dramatically Beatrice Gallagher had altered the balance of power. What had begun as an accidental encounter inside a blood-soaked conference room gradually evolved into one of Lorenzo Moretti's greatest strategic advantages. Within weeks, rival organizations stopped viewing Lorenzo as merely a feared mafia leader with superior firepower. Instead, they became increasingly cautious because they knew every negotiation now included a woman capable of hearing what others could never detect. Beatrice's extraordinary gift extended far beyond speaking multiple languages. She understood the invisible rules that shaped every culture, every dialect, and every criminal organization. She recognized when silence carried greater meaning than spoken promises, when an ancient proverb concealed a threat, and when a seemingly respectful compliment masked an attempt to gain leverage. In a world where a single misunderstood phrase could trigger a violent conflict, her ability to interpret hidden intention became more valuable than any weapon Lorenzo possessed. One negotiation after another confirmed that Lorenzo had made the right decision by keeping her close. Their first major assignment after the historic summit brought them to a discreet meeting with influential members of New York's Irish underworld. The gathering appeared friendly on the surface, filled with laughter, whiskey, and old stories that seemed entirely unrelated to business. Lorenzo listened patiently while Arthur Gallagher, the veteran Irish mob leader, spoke in a thick working-class Dublin dialect that intentionally confused outsiders. Several expressions carried double meanings that could easily trap an inexperienced negotiator into accepting unfavorable conditions without realizing it. Beatrice remained silent for most of the discussion, carefully observing every pause, every joke, and every shift in Arthur's tone. Then at exactly the right moment, she answered him using the same regional accent and street slang he had grown up hearing throughout his childhood. The entire room fell silent. Arthur's confident smile disappeared almost instantly. He realized that the woman sitting beside Lorenzo not only understood his words but also recognized every coded message hidden inside them. Instead of allowing him to manipulate the negotiation through tradition and local expressions, Beatrice calmly dismantled each verbal trap while preserving his dignity. The conversation shifted immediately from psychological games to genuine cooperation, and the agreement was finalized far more quickly than anyone had expected. Not long afterward, Lorenzo arranged separate discussions with Russian financiers responsible for expanding shipping operations throughout Eastern Europe. Once again, Beatrice demonstrated why ordinary translators could never replace her. During one particularly delicate exchange, a senior Russian representative repeatedly used an old underworld proverb that seemed harmless to everyone else in the room. The phrase literally encouraged patience during difficult negotiations. But Beatrice recognized that within certain criminal circles it implied temporary submission before an inevitable betrayal. Rather than interrupting the meeting, she quietly leaned toward Lorenzo and explained the cultural significance hidden beneath the words. Thanks to her warning, Lorenzo carefully adjusted his proposal, refusing several conditions that would have granted his rivals an opportunity to seize future shipments. The Russians never realized their strategy had been uncovered, and Lorenzo left the meeting with a stronger agreement than originally anticipated. It was another quiet victory, achieved not through intimidation but through intelligence. Similar successes followed whenever representatives from the Macau Triad or the Mexican cartel arrived in New York. With the Triad, Beatrice instinctively understood the importance of hierarchy, honor, and indirect communication. Instead of translating sentences literally, she reshaped Lorenzo's words so they reflected the respectful balance expected within Chinese culture while preserving every strategic objective. Potential misunderstandings vanished before they could develop into personal insults. During meetings with Hector Salazar's organization, she adapted just as naturally, switching into authentic regional Spanish while matching the confidence and humor expected among cartel leaders. Her remarkable ability to move effortlessly between cultures gradually earned admiration even from longtime rivals. Some respected her brilliance, others feared her. Many simply stopped attempting linguistic manipulation altogether because they knew every hidden meaning would be uncovered before it reached Lorenzo. As Lorenzo watched Beatrice transform impossible negotiations into lasting alliances, his confidence in her grew stronger with every passing week. At first he had relied on her because no one else possessed her extraordinary skills. Now he sought her opinion before making decisions that had nothing to do with language. She reviewed intelligence reports, evaluated diplomatic risks, and quietly challenged strategies whenever she believed another solution existed. Lorenzo soon realized that Beatrice approached every problem differently from the hardened criminals surrounding him. Where others instinctively reached for violence, she searched for understanding. Where experienced captains expected betrayal, she looked for overlooked patterns that revealed the truth. Her perspective repeatedly prevented unnecessary bloodshed while strengthening the Moretti family's influence throughout the international underworld. Outside the conference rooms, an entirely different relationship slowly developed between them. The intimidating Mafia boss who rarely revealed emotion gradually became more relaxed whenever Beatrice was nearby. Formal strategy sessions occasionally turned into long conversations over late-night coffee inside the penthouse library. Lorenzo listened with genuine curiosity as she described her years studying applied linguistics at Georgetown University, explaining how dialects evolved alongside migration, politics, and history. In return, he spoke about the immense pressure of inheriting an empire where every decision carried life-or-death consequences. Neither of them noticed how naturally those conversations became part of their daily routine. Moments of laughter appeared where only silence had once existed. Beatrice no longer felt intimidated every time Lorenzo entered a room, while Lorenzo found himself searching for excuses to prolong discussions that had long since reached their conclusion. The more time they spent together, the more protective Lorenzo became without fully realizing it. Whenever negotiations required travel, he personally inspected security arrangements before allowing Beatrice to accompany him. If a meeting felt unusually dangerous, he quietly doubled the number of bodyguards surrounding her. During one particularly tense gathering, he instinctively stepped between Beatrice and an agitated delegate whose temper threatened to erupt into violence. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet it revealed far more than either of them was willing to admit. Beatrice noticed how naturally Lorenzo shielded her from danger, while Lorenzo gradually accepted that protecting her had become something deeper than professional responsibility. She was no longer simply an extraordinary interpreter. She had become someone whose safety mattered to him personally. Just as life within the Moretti organization seemed to stabilize, a new mystery emerged. Lorenzo's intelligence network intercepted a collection of encrypted communications believed to originate from Grigori Udin's organization. Experienced analysts examined the documents for days without discovering anything beyond routine shipping schedules and warehouse logistics. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Lorenzo eventually handed the files to Beatrice, trusting her instincts more than sophisticated decoding software or veteran investigators. She immediately sensed that something about the messages felt unnatural. Rather than searching for obvious codes, she focused on grammar, recurring expressions, sentence structure, and subtle linguistic habits that most people would dismiss as insignificant. For nearly 3 days, she isolated herself inside the penthouse surrounding the dining table with dictionaries, handwritten notes, phonetic comparisons, and dozens of translated pages. Coffee cups accumulated beside stacks of highlighted documents as she patiently examined every line again and again. Eventually, a pattern emerged. Certain Russian phrases appeared in positions that native speakers would never naturally choose. The syntax consistently reflected someone unconsciously translating English thought patterns into Russian. Even more revealing was the repeated use of a familiar expression that Lorenzo's underboss Vincent often inserted into everyday conversations. The habit seemed insignificant until Beatrice realized the exact same grammatical fingerprint appeared throughout every encrypted communication. The anonymous author was unknowingly revealing his identity through language itself. Her pulse quickened as the final pieces fell into place. The messages contained far more than shipping information. Hidden beneath the coded terminology were warehouse security codes, convoy schedules, and detailed instructions describing the perfect opportunity to eliminate Lorenzo during an upcoming weapons transfer at the Red Hook warehouse. Beatrice rushed to Lorenzo's office carrying the marked documents, barely able to control her breathing. As she explained her findings, Lorenzo's expression hardened with every sentence. Vincent, the man who had served beside him for years, had secretly supplied Grigori with confidential intelligence while pretending to remain loyal to the Moretti family. The planned operation was not a routine shipment, but an elaborate ambush designed to destroy Lorenzo's organization in a single devastating attack. Every clue leading to the conspiracy had remained invisible until Beatrice recognized the subtle linguistic patterns hidden inside ordinary words. Once again, she had accomplished what seasoned investigators and experienced intelligence officers could not. Her extraordinary understanding of language had uncovered a betrayal concealed in plain sight, exposing the enemy before he had the opportunity to strike. As Lorenzo quietly absorbed the shocking truth, he realized that the coming confrontation would not simply decide the future of his empire. It would also determine whether the remarkable woman who had repeatedly saved him could survive the dangerous world into which fate had unexpectedly drawn her. The evidence Beatrice uncovered left Lorenzo Moretti with only a few precious hours to respond. Every encrypted message, every shipment schedule, and every subtle linguistic clue pointed toward the same conclusion: Grigori Udin had orchestrated a carefully planned ambush at the Red Hook warehouse, using Vincent's betrayal to destroy the Moretti organization from within. Canceling the operation would protect Lorenzo temporarily, but it would also confirm to his enemies that their conspiracy had been exposed, allowing them to disappear before justice could reach them. Lorenzo refused to surrender the initiative. If Grigori wanted a battlefield, he would choose the battlefield himself. Throughout the night, trusted captains quietly mobilized loyal soldiers, relocated weapons, and transformed the abandoned waterfront warehouse into a carefully designed defensive position. Snipers occupied elevated steel catwalks overlooking the loading bays. Assault teams concealed themselves behind towering cargo containers, and escape routes were deliberately left open to lure the attackers into predictable lines of movement. Every man understood that by sunrise, either the Moretti Empire would emerge stronger than ever, or it would cease to exist. When Lorenzo informed Beatrice that she would accompany the operation, she stared at him in disbelief. She reminded him that she had never held a gun, never participated in combat, and had spent her entire life solving problems with knowledge instead of violence. Lorenzo listened patiently before quietly explaining that her role had nothing to do with fighting. Grigori's men relied on encrypted Russian radio communication to coordinate every movement during tactical operations. Experienced soldiers could hear the transmissions, but only Beatrice possessed the extraordinary linguistic instincts necessary to interpret regional slang, military abbreviations, and subtle variations in pronunciation quickly enough to make them useful during live combat. More importantly, Lorenzo no longer believed anywhere was truly safe for her. If Grigori succeeded, Beatrice would become the first person every rival organization tried to capture. Keeping her beside him was no longer simply a matter of trust, it was the only way he could guarantee her survival. Although fear tightened her chest, Beatrice recognized the truth in his words. For the second time since entering Lorenzo's world, destiny had offered her no ordinary escape. Before dawn, armored vehicles rolled silently toward the deserted industrial district overlooking New York Harbor. Thick fog drifted across abandoned shipping docks while rows of rusted containers cast long shadows beneath the fading moonlight. Inside the enormous warehouse, millions of dollars worth of untraceable weapons waited inside reinforced wooden crates, exactly where Grigori expected to find them. Lorenzo moved calmly through the building, inspecting every defensive position with disciplined precision. His soldiers checked ammunition, synchronized communication channels, and reviewed contingency plans one final time. Above the warehouse floor, Beatrice remained hidden beside Lorenzo on an elevated steel catwalk overlooking the entire complex. A tactical headset rested over her ears, connecting her to a sophisticated radio receiver capable of intercepting encrypted enemy frequencies. She clutched a digital tablet displaying translated call signs while repeatedly reminding herself to concentrate on the voices rather than the danger surrounding them. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the silence filling the warehouse. The waiting finally ended when the massive loading doors groaned open. One black SUV after another rolled slowly into the warehouse headlights, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Heavily armed Russian soldiers immediately spread throughout the building with disciplined efficiency, securing entrances while scanning the upper catwalks. Grigori himself emerged moments later, his confident smile revealing absolute certainty that victory already belonged to him. Walking only a few steps behind him was Vincent. The trusted underboss who had shared Lorenzo's table for years now stood openly beside the enemy, nervously avoiding eye contact as though ashamed of what he had become. Watching the scene unfold, Lorenzo felt no anger, only quiet disappointment. Betrayal from strangers was expected. Betrayal from family cut far deeper. Neither side fired immediately. Lorenzo deliberately allowed Grigori's forces to move deeper into the warehouse, encouraging them to believe every detail of the ambush remained under their control. Over the radio, Beatrice listened carefully as Russian commanders issued rapid instructions directing assault teams toward predetermined attack positions. Their conversations confirmed everything she had predicted from the encrypted documents. Grigori expected Lorenzo's men to panic once surrounded, allowing hidden snipers to eliminate the Moretti leadership before organized resistance became possible. Lorenzo remained perfectly still, waiting patiently until every enemy unit occupied exactly the positions he had anticipated. Then fate intervened. A faint reflection from one concealed riflescope caught the attention of a Russian lookout. An urgent warning exploded across the radio channel, and within an instant the warehouse erupted into deafening violence. Automatic gunfire tore through wooden crates, steel beams, and concrete pillars as both sides unleashed carefully prepared attacks. Explosions echoed beneath the warehouse roof while shattered glass rained across the loading docks. Lorenzo's soldiers answered every burst of enemy fire with disciplined precision, refusing to surrender their carefully fortified positions. From the catwalk above, Beatrice pressed herself against a steel support column as bullets ricocheted only inches away. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, yet she forced herself to keep listening. Amid the thunder of gunfire, the Russian tactical frequency suddenly became crowded with overlapping commands. Officers shouted directions, requested reinforcements, and reported changing battlefield positions with astonishing speed. Filtering through the chaos, Beatrice identified one transmission that immediately changed everything. A Russian commander had ordered 12 heavily armed soldiers to advance through the northern staircase and attack Lorenzo's position from behind. If they succeeded, the defensive line protecting the catwalk would collapse within minutes. For a brief moment, panic threatened to cloud her judgment. Then, years of studying phonetics, regional dialects, and vocal patterns suddenly converged inside her mind. Without allowing herself time to hesitate, Beatrice seized Lorenzo's spare military radio. Closing her eyes, she recalled the commanding voice she had heard leading Grigori's elite units only moments earlier. When she finally spoke, her own voice disappeared completely. In its place emerged the unmistakable authority of a senior Russian field commander speaking flawless Moscow military Russian. Her pronunciation, rhythm, and command structure were so convincing that even experienced officers would have struggled to recognize the deception. She urgently announced that Italian forces had already secured the northern staircase, and that every assault unit must immediately abandon its advance before walking into a deadly trap. Instead, she ordered all available personnel to regroup at the southern exit and prepare for a coordinated withdrawal. Every sentence sounded authentic because she understood not only the language but also the psychology behind military communication. She knew precisely how experienced commanders spoke under pressure, which words inspired unquestioning obedience, and which expressions immediately established authority. The response was almost instantaneous. Confused but disciplined, the Russian assault team abruptly halted its advance and changed direction exactly as Beatrice had instructed. Soldiers who only seconds earlier had been preparing to overwhelm Lorenzo now sprinted toward the southern loading bay, unknowingly entering the very killing zone Lorenzo had secretly prepared before the operation began. Beatrice removed the headset only long enough to inform Lorenzo that the enemy had taken the bait. He needed no further explanation. Raising one hand, he silently signaled his hidden assault teams. Machine guns erupted simultaneously from concealed positions while snipers eliminated retreating officers attempting to reorganize their forces. Trapped inside converging fields of fire, Grigori's elite soldiers found themselves unable to advance or retreat. Within moments, the carefully planned ambush had been completely reversed. The hunters had become the hunted, all because one unarmed linguist had manipulated an entire battlefield using nothing more than flawless language and extraordinary composure. As resistance collapsed, surviving attackers began throwing down their weapons. Vincent attempted to escape through a side entrance during the confusion, but loyal Moretti soldiers intercepted him before he reached the docks. Forced onto his knees at gunpoint, he confessed to supplying Grigori with shipment schedules, warehouse security codes, and confidential intelligence in exchange for promises of power and protection. His betrayal had nearly destroyed everything Lorenzo had spent decades building. Grigori, however, disappeared before Lorenzo's men could surround him completely. Protected by the confusion created during the final exchange of gunfire, the Russian oligarch escaped aboard an armored vehicle waiting beyond the warehouse perimeter, abandoning countless loyal soldiers to secure his own survival. Lorenzo watched the convoy disappear into the early morning mist, fully aware that their conflict had not yet reached its conclusion. Only after the last shot faded into silence did Lorenzo finally allow himself to breathe. He slowly lowered his rifle and climbed the steel staircase toward the catwalk, where Beatrice remained standing beside the abandoned radio equipment. Her clothes were covered with dust, her hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears streamed silently down her face as the overwhelming tension finally released its grip. Without caring who witnessed the moment, Lorenzo crossed the remaining distance and pulled her into his arms. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Words seemed insignificant compared to everything they had survived together. Eventually, Lorenzo leaned back just enough to look into her exhausted eyes and quietly admitted the truth he could no longer deny. The first time they met, Beatrice had saved his empire by preventing an international alliance from collapsing into bloodshed. Tonight, she had saved his life by defeating an entire military operation with intelligence alone. No soldier, no advisor, and no lifelong associate had ever protected him the way she had. Standing together inside the silent warehouse surrounded by the consequences of betrayal and sacrifice, both of them understood that their partnership had grown into something far deeper than duty or gratitude. Trust had become unshakable, loyalty, admiration had become love, and together they had survived the darkest night either of them had ever known. Morning sunlight slowly filtered through the broken windows of the Red Hook warehouse, illuminating the aftermath of a battle that had changed the fate of everyone involved. The deafening roar of automatic weapons had faded into silence, leaving behind scattered shell casings, damaged crates, abandoned vehicles, and exhausted soldiers, securing what remained of the battlefield. Medics moved among the wounded, while Lorenzo Moretti's captains quietly coordinated the cleanup. Vincent, his betrayal finally exposed beyond denial, had been taken into custody to face the consequences of his treason. Grigori Yudin had escaped beneath the cover of chaos, but his carefully orchestrated conspiracy had collapsed completely. The Moretti organization had survived its greatest internal threat in years, and the alliance Lorenzo had fought so hard to protect remained intact. Yet, as Lorenzo surveyed the warehouse, he understood that none of those victories represented the true miracle of the night. His eyes instinctively searched for only one person: Standing near the abandoned communications equipment, still wearing clothes stained with dust and smoke, Beatrice Gallagher quietly watched the sunrise, seemingly unaware that she had just altered the future of an empire. Lorenzo crossed the warehouse floor without saying a word. Every soldier instinctively stepped aside, sensing that the moment belonged to them alone. When he finally stood before Beatrice, the feared leader of New York's most powerful criminal family looked nothing like the ruthless strategist his enemies described. There was no arrogance in his expression, no commanding authority, and no carefully maintained emotional distance. Instead, gratitude filled his eyes with a sincerity Beatrice had never seen before. He gently reached for her trembling hands, noticing how they still shook from the adrenaline that had carried her through the firefight. Looking directly into her eyes, Lorenzo quietly admitted that throughout his entire life he had trusted very few people, yet none had ever protected him with the loyalty, intelligence, and courage she had shown. She had entered his world carrying sandwiches for strangers and, against every imaginable expectation, had become the reason he still stood alive. She had saved his organization when international negotiations threatened to collapse into bloodshed, uncovered the traitor hidden within his inner circle, and defeated an elite assault force without firing a single bullet. Lorenzo confessed that no amount of money could ever repay what she had given him. She had not merely preserved his empire, she had given him a future. Hearing those words, Beatrice struggled to hold back tears that had nothing to do with fear. For most of her life, people had looked at her without truly seeing her. They noticed her appearance before they noticed her intelligence. They judged her weight before they discovered her education. They assumed she lacked confidence because she worked as a delivery driver, instead of recognizing the years of discipline, sacrifice, and academic excellence that had shaped the woman she had become. Even after entering Lorenzo's world, part of her had continued believing she was only a temporary solution to an extraordinary problem. She never imagined that someone as powerful as Lorenzo Moretti would genuinely value her opinions, rely upon her judgment, and protect her simply because he believed in her. Through tears, she admitted that the greatest gift he had given her was not financial security or luxurious surroundings. It was the opportunity to believe in herself again. For the first time in years, she no longer felt invisible. Lorenzo smiled softly before lifting one hand to gently brush a loose strand of hair away from her face. The battlefield around them disappeared into silence as neither of them attempted to hide what had gradually grown between them. Their relationship had never been built upon dramatic declarations or impulsive attraction. Instead, it had been forged through impossible negotiations, sleepless nights studying encrypted messages, countless conversations inside quiet penthouse libraries, and unwavering trust during moments when betrayal surrounded them from every direction. Together they had faced dangers neither could have survived alone. Lorenzo had protected Beatrice's life with his strength, while Beatrice had repeatedly protected Lorenzo's future with her remarkable mind. No words remained capable of expressing everything they felt. Slowly, Lorenzo leaned forward and kissed her for the first time. It was neither rushed nor uncertain. It was a quiet promise born from respect, gratitude, admiration, and love, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would never face them apart again. When they finally stepped back, Lorenzo turned toward the captain's advisors and soldiers who had gathered throughout the warehouse. Every member of the Moretti family had witnessed Beatrice's extraordinary contribution over the previous weeks. They had watched her save an international negotiation, expose an internal conspiracy, and outwit an entire tactical assault through intelligence alone, raising his voice just enough for everyone present to hear. Lorenzo announced that from this day forward, Beatrice Gallagher would no longer serve as the family's interpreter. Effective immediately, she was appointed consigliera of the Moretti family, the highest advisory position within the organization, and the only person whose counsel would stand beside Lorenzo's own authority. The declaration stunned even the most experienced captains. Such a title had traditionally been reserved for lifelong members of the family, trusted advisors who had spent decades earning unquestioned loyalty. Yet no one objected. Every person present understood that Beatrice had earned the position through actions rather than bloodline. Before the surprise could settle, Lorenzo made one final announcement that carried even greater significance. Looking directly at Beatrice, he declared that she would forever be recognized as the queen of the Moretti family. The title was not granted because she had fallen in love with the family's leader, nor because she had been rescued from an ordinary life. She had earned it by proving again and again that true leadership required wisdom, compassion, integrity, and extraordinary courage. Respect could never be inherited. It had to be earned. Every soldier standing in that warehouse understood exactly why Lorenzo had made his decision. The applause that followed was not offered out of obligation, but out of genuine admiration for the woman who had transformed their future. Life gradually settled into a calmer rhythm over the months that followed. With Vincent's betrayal eliminated and Grigori's influence significantly weakened, the Moretti organization entered one of the most stable periods in its history. Lorenzo continued leading the family with unwavering determination, but he no longer carried every burden alone. Seated beside him during every major meeting, Beatrice became the quiet voice of reason that balanced strength with diplomacy. International negotiations became smoother because she understood how to bridge cultures instead of exploiting their differences. Conflicts that once seemed destined to end in violence were often resolved through careful dialogue, patience, and insight. Lorenzo increasingly relied upon her judgment before making critical decisions, knowing that her perspective often revealed solutions hidden from everyone else. Together, they reshaped the organization into something stronger than fear alone could ever build. Their greatest victories were no longer measured solely by territory or wealth, but by the stability they created through trust and understanding. Although her surroundings had changed beyond recognition, Beatrice never forgot where she had come from. She occasionally smiled at the memory of carrying heavy catering bags through Manhattan, worrying about overdue rent, and wondering whether anyone would ever recognize her true potential. The expensive clothes, luxurious penthouse, personal security team, and unimaginable wealth were simply consequences of a journey she had never expected to take. They were not the reasons her life had changed. What truly transformed her future was the knowledge she had spent years acquiring, the resilience she had developed through countless disappointments, and the courage to trust her own abilities when everyone else underestimated her. Those qualities had always existed. They had merely been overlooked by people too quick to judge appearances. Looking back, Lorenzo often realized that destiny had arrived at his door in the most ordinary disguise imaginable. The woman who had walked into a billion-dollar mafia negotiation carrying nothing more dangerous than sandwiches had become the person he trusted above everyone else. She had not conquered an empire through violence, inherited influence through family connections, or achieved greatness because of extraordinary beauty. She had earned every opportunity through intelligence, unwavering determination, and the courage to remain true to herself even in the darkest moments. Their story became a quiet reminder that the most remarkable people are often hidden behind ordinary lives, waiting for one unexpected chance to reveal who they truly are. In the end, Beatrice Gallagher did not become the queen of the Moretti family because fate chose her. She became queen because she repeatedly chose courage over fear, wisdom over pride, and compassion over hatred. Her journey proved that genuine strength is never measured by physical appearance, social status, or first impressions. The qualities that shape a person's destiny are found within the mind, the heart, and the choices made when everything is at stake. Sometimes the world overlooks extraordinary people simply because they do not fit its expectations. Yet when knowledge, integrity, and bravery are given the opportunity to shine, they possess the power to rewrite even the most impossible future. And that more than wealth or power became the greatest victory either Lorenzo or Beatrice would ever achieve.